This is All India Radio. In the weekly program Current Affairs, now we bring you a discussion on Babasaheb Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's contribution to nation building. The participants are Professor Sushma Yadav, member UGC and Pro VC Central University of Haryana, and Sri Prakash Singh, Director South Campus, University of Delhi, and Omvesh Upadhyay, AIR Correspondent.
Babasaheb Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar's contribution to India's nation-building process were vast and multifaceted, spanning the areas of education, law, politics, economics, and social justice. His tireless efforts to empower marginalized communities, particularly Dalits, challenged the traditional caste system and paved the way for a more inclusive and democratic society in India. Dr. Ambedkar's advocacy for human rights, equality, and social welfare left an indelible mark on India's history and continues to inspire generations of activists and scholars even today. In this radio talk, we will explore the life journey of Dr. Ambedkar and his contributions to India's nation building. And today, to discuss on this in detail, we are joined by two professors in the program, Professor S.P. Singh and Professor Sushma Yadav. Welcome to the program. To begin the conversation, I want to know from you, Professor Sushma, that how did Dr. Ambedkar's personal experiences and struggles with discrimination and prejudice shape his worldview and activism?
Yes, I think it's a good point to begin with. Although Dr. Ambedkar was born in a cantonment, so his father was in army, so he had a different life, which was surely better than many of his contemporary rural people. And he could get education in a better school also because that was in the cantonment. His experiences in school and his experience in outside world surely gave him a better insight into the social inequalities and untouchability of the Indian society. Like if we read his life's incidents, then some incidents which he later on quoted and which I still remember, or they trouble my mind always, are the ones that he used to have his separate rug in the school, which nobody would pick up. He himself would take it, like when his brother would also do that, or people like him would do that, and they will take it to their homes and bring it back or keep it separately. Whenever he had some answers to give, so if there is a maths or any other subject, and the teacher asks the question, and naturally I think he was a bright student and a brilliant mind, so if he had answers to give, he wouldn't have been able to reach the board because the board was at a place behind which there were tiffins of the other students. And if he would write at the board, they thought the food would be polluted. You can imagine a young, brilliant mind seeing this kind of feeling and antipathy and discrimination or something which excluded him from giving answers. And when they went out, he gives one instance where both brothers were going out, but they had nobody to offer transport. So one bullock cart came, they tried to stop him. Whomsoever they stopped, they said if they were from this caste, nobody would give them a seat. So then finally they also found out that if they give more money, they are able to take it, which means it was a fluid system, but it was a tough system. So they ran a bullock cart, but when the man came to know, he again left them in the lurch. Same experience was with barber. So these were the barber wouldn't shave them or wouldn't cut their hair. I think these were indelible marks on his mind and on his conscience, on his thinking, which later on made him a bitter critic of the Indian social system which had caste ingrained in it. And that's why he went up to the task of writing Annihilation of Caste. So these experiences, bitter experiences of early life, I would say made a deep impact on his psyche, and that's why besides economics, he wanted to touch the social composition of Indian society.
So, Professor Singh, when we talk about the early life of Babasaheb Bhimrao Ambedkar, how these incidents, the challenges that he faced at that time, build his character?
From his childhood days, we can see that he has been struggling with the odds created by our society. For example, very eagerly he requested to his mother, get me admission in a school and I'll sit back with the chappals and will study. Another issue came where you will study at home. At that time, his family was having a goat, he asked his mother that I'll sit with the goat and study. Jokingly, I used to say, whole world knows about the goat and milk associated with Gandhiji, but no one knows about the goat in family of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. That was the corner in his room where he used to sit and study. Second aspect I would like to air, Dr. Ambedkar became doctor later. As a child, he was so conscious about environmental values. Few days back, I was reading a book by author, and he wrote in that book, he used to save pennies received from here and there from his relatives and friends, sometimes family members, and to purchase some good plants to plant at home. This was Dr. Babasaheb Bhimrao Ambedkar. That aspect of Babasaheb Ambedkar is not known to the world. Another thing, the kind of problems he faced in beginning. There are two things when you face problem. One is you break down or you start facing it. You take it as a challenge. And Dr. B.R. Ambedkar took it as challenge and past all odds became the Babasaheb for the world. Not only for India, now Babasaheb's name is accorded as Mahamanav by United Nations. This is the achievement. It's not only that we are celebrating Babasaheb's birthday. The whole country is celebrating birthday of Dr. Babasaheb. It's not me and you. Every segment of the society. Professor Sushma Yadav may vouch with me. Few years ago, only few people used to celebrate in this manner through seminar, through symposia. But today, with the advent of Narendra Modi government at the center, Babasaheb again became center of discourse and discussions, policy making, and the concerns raised by him usually covered by the government policies. And today, you see the atmosphere top to bottom, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, east or west, you will find everyone is celebrating Babasaheb's birthday. This is the impact of Babasaheb's life, his creations, his contributions to our society.
And Professor Singh, you talked about several incidents where Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar was a pioneer and stalwart from the very beginning. But when we talk about Dr. Ambedkar's advocacy for Dalit rights and the reform that he brought to social justice against the challenges and traditional caste system in India, what's your take on that?
Babasaheb Ambedkar was very much concerned about the conditions of Dalits and Vanchits in our society. When he came back from abroad, joined Sayaji Rai Gaikwad as secretary to army, he realized that if a person like me, who appears to be handsome, suited, booted, knows many things of the world, well educated, is facing such a humiliatory problems, untouchability, what will be happening to our own people, those who are not literate, those who are not aware about their rights? Then Babasaheb to pledge that I'll devote my life for this cause. And that was the turning moment in life of Babasaheb Ambedkar. One incident I would like to quote here. In 1923, when he came back from Columbia having the PhD degree, somehow British government located him. He was staying in a chawl and sent their officials to discuss with Babasaheb in which capacity he would like to serve the British government. One position was offered to him was the principalship of a college. Another position was offered to him temporary judge to the Mumbai High Court. And when he refused, later on that position of judgeship was offered him as a permanent, that within 6 months he will be promoted as a permanent judge. And at that point of time, he was offered 4,000 rupees per month. Just imagine. Then Babasaheb calculated. Professor Yadav writes about him. He calculated what are my earnings and what are my expenditure. And he calculated that hardly I need 200 rupees. Looking at his necessities, looking at his society, looking at the concerns of the downtrodden, he refused those offers of the British government and went with the mission what he had at the time of Vadodara, when he was returning from the Vadodara, that I'll devote my life for the cause of the downtrodden of the society.
Professor Yadav, it would be great if you can share with our listeners and highlight Dr. Ambedkar's work as a social reformer and politician that helped to shape India's modern democratic institutions.
Dr. Ambedkar understood democracy, and he, I would say, was a real modern person at that time, a modern man. And his understanding of the Western education system, Western society at that time, and Western nation state system did impress him for some time, but I think he looked inside as well, or inward as well. So Buddha's thought and our history of Ganarajyas, the history of the great India that we had before, that also impressed him. That's why he said that it's surprising, had Indian society been a united society, nobody could have really won it over, nobody could have conquered it. That was his understanding. So he wanted to create a strong, empowered India. And a strong, empowered India could not be there without the empowerment of Dalits or without the empowerment of the marginalized classes. He called them depressed classes. He didn't use the word Dalits. Depressed classes who were dispossessed or depressed because of the system of inequality. So he brought into the constitution the values of democracy, the values of republicanism, the value of equality, the value of liberty, and value of fraternity. This fraternity was not merely a brotherhood of some kind, but a brotherhood of citizens, which would make India one family. That is why he introduced it. So he went beyond the revolutions which had occurred at that time, and perfect equality of man and woman he envisioned in this constitution. He went even beyond this, because he talked of unity and integrity of the nation, that is India, and he also talked about dignity of the individual, which I think is most important part of any conception of social justice. Therefore, he created a constitution which had federalism, which had unitarianism, which could take on all kind of onslaughts, but still weather out all kinds of attacks on the Indian nationhood, but stand as a strong nation. And these 75 years have shown us that Indian federalism has stood the test of time. He also gave a constitution which was flexible but rigid, both things included, because he believed that there has to be a constitution at this time in India which cannot be changed easily, but it shouldn't be locked forever also. I remember his words. He said, we must believe that posterity, our younger generations, will have lots of ideas. So we should never make a constitution which cannot be changed. They may have even brighter ideas than us to add. He also cautioned Indians against hero worship, because that doesn't go with a democracy. And he also talked about, I think he was the only person who talked about constitutional morality. And so he said, the constitution will work well if there are good people, and morality must be learned by all. And to your second part, I would say, he was not a politician, in fact. He was a statesman. He was a political thinker. He never really acted like a politician, otherwise he wouldn't have lost the elections, which he again and again lost. He was only interested in the best of the dispossessed and deprived, the classes which he really vouchsafed for, and he was also interested in making India a stronger nation. That's why he had the courage to talk against Article 370. He had the courage to talk against secularism. He had the courage also to go for uniform civil code, and he had the courage to put forth a revolutionary bill at that time which was called Hindu Code Bill. We have seen time has stood with him. We have almost taken all the clauses of that bill one by one into different reforms and legislations which we have passed after that. And they are all coming true. So I would say he really looked beyond his times. He was a real visionary, but he was also a pragmatic person. That's why India is a union of states which turn Unitarian whenever there is a threat on the existence of the nationhood or the state.
And to take the discussion forward, Professor Yadav, I also want to mention that how Ambedkar also talked about important role of women, and he also ensured gender parity, gave the principle of equal pay for equal work. He talked about universal adult franchise, ensured that women had the right to vote immediately after independence. What's your view on that?
True. Thank you for bringing this. Because without a discussion on this aspect, we can never complete our discussion on Dr. Ambedkar. When I say visionary, it was only Indian Constitution or Indian nation where women got these rights, the right to suffrage, especially right to vote, without any struggle, just with a stroke of pen which wrote the Constitution. In America, they hadn't got the right till then. In Britain, they had to struggle for years. In other European nations also they had to struggle, but here they got it. And I remember Dr. Ambedkar saying that I can judge a nation's progress by looking at the status of women in that. And he ensured that through the Constitution. I talked about Hindu Code Bill earlier. I remember him talking to Dalit women, telling them that you must be clean, you must be healthy, you must wear good clothes, you must wear good ornaments even if they are less. Don't go for cheaper things. Like in life, you must have higher aims. So education for him was in fact as essential for women or much more essential for women than men. And he completely believed in women empowerment because equal work for equal pay was introduced by him. Beyond this, he also introduced maternity leave, which is extended by this government beyond 3 months. But I would like to quote him, what he said when he was introducing the bill on maternity leave. He said, the state ought to bear the liability of giving rest to a woman before the birth of a child and after the birth of child, because a woman is bringing forth the next generation of citizens. Look at his conception of the leave and the rest that is required, because a woman is not doing it for herself. It is for the entire society, the family, which has to continue, and I would say complete humanity. He could realize that, and he did vouch for that. So whatever he talked about women, the equality of man and woman, which is ingrained in Article 1415, which also gives possibility of positive discrimination, and that's why we have 50% reservation in the Panchayati Raj institutions in India. It paved way for that positive discrimination. And I would go further. It was that which ultimately allowed India to have a woman prime minister and a woman president much earlier than so many so-called progressive and developed nations.
Absolutely. And I remember you were mentioning about how Constitution worked as a moral compass. And on the same, when Dr. Ambedkar said that for India, where society is divided on the basis of caste, religion, language and other factors, a common moral compass is needed, and Constitution is that. So, Professor Singh, what was the role, and if you can highlight in detail Dr. Ambedkar's role, how significant he has been while drafting the Indian Constitution?
If you look at the drafting committee, first I'll discuss how Dr. Ambedkar became part of the Constituent Assembly. Then he was chosen to drafting committee, and later he became chairman of the drafting committee. Pandit Nehru and Sardar Patel both discussed with Gandhiji regarding Ivor Jennings. They wanted to invite him to advise for the constitution making. But Gandhiji suggested about Dr. Ambedkar. We have our own Ivor Jennings, why we should look beyond, and that was the Dr. Ambedkar, and Dr. Ambedkar's major role starts from there as a chairman of the drafting committee. Aladi Krishna, role of Dr. Ambedkar. If you read Constituent Assembly debate, you will find that he clearly mentions that out of all members, 2 was from South, 1 went to America, and others were not available. So whole responsibility of drafting came onto the responsible shoulders of Babasaheb Ambedkar. So that way, it's a singular contribution, the biggest contribution by a person, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, as chair of drafting committee. We are told that he knew about 60 constitutions. I'm a student of political science. We taught initially that Aristotle, a Greek philosopher, knew about 158 constitutions, written or unwritten. Majority was unwritten. Dr. Ambedkar was perhaps the second individual in history of political science that who knew about 60 constitutions in and out. Such a vast experience became an instrument of this wonderful constitution, which was very well elaborated by Professor Sushma Yadav ji earlier. You just look at the success stories, whether it's Ireland, whether it's Britain, whether it's US, whether it's South Africa, whether it's Germany. From every success story, we had something in our constitution, and we have a complete package in that respect. Whatever he wanted to have in constitution, you will find very much there. And one thing I would like to highlight to you, his own conviction was about presidential form of democracy. As Professor Sushma Yadav was referring, looking at our treasures, looking at our legacy, looking at our practices, looking at our beliefs, with the parliamentary system, with the sanghas, and our experiences in earlier practices post 1935 governance, Dr. Ambedkar went with parliamentary form of democracy. He was initially in favor of pure federal structure as of America, but looking at the plurality of Indian society, diversity of our nation, he went with the quasi-federal structure, as very rightly she was referring about once it become unitary and later on it's democratic in a manner. This is unique contribution of Dr. V.R. Ambedkar. And if you look at the political reservation at the time of elections, our country is the only country where we had the reservation of seat for politicians. In both the houses and legislative elections, the seats are reserved for the downtrodden community in form of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe seat. As of his contribution is concerned, we can go on turning page and page of the history and will find that it is Dr. Ambedkar's immense contribution where everyone, every color, every ideological belief in our country is trying to associate with Dr. Ambedkar's perspective of the society.
Absolutely. We know Dr. Ambedkar as the father of Indian Constitution, but there's also a lesser known fact among the general public. He was also a distinguished economist. So I want to bring Professor Yadav in the conversation with this. Professor Yadav, can you please share with our listeners about Dr. Ambedkar's economic ideas and policies that he contributed to build the India of post-independence, especially in the areas of land reform and social welfare?
Professor Prakash just now mentioned there were many aspects of Dr. Ambedkar's ideas and thought which were lesser known to people. And his being an economist was in fact one such aspect. Everyone thought he was a constitutionalist or he was a lawyer, and that is why he wrote the constitution. But he was a great economist. And as my dear brother, Professor Singh mentioned, that he gave the idea of RBI. So Reserve Bank of India was his idea. I would also like to bring forth here and mention that he went to study economics. He did his MA in economics, then he did his PhD in economics. And he wrote a thesis on problem of Indian rupee. And he gave wonderful ideas about how Indian rupee can be stronger and how our economy can be stronger. So problem of Indian rupee, and the other one was about provincial finances in India. So the idea of public finance, the idea of distribution of finance among the federating units or the states as we call them, provinces as we called them at that time, was given by Dr. Ambedkar after a lot of study. And these are very lesser known contributions of his. Then industrialization. Now we are talking about Make in India, Atmanirbhar India. Babasaheb Ambedkar talked about industrialization at that time because that was the pinnacle of progress or development of any economy. He also gave the idea of employment exchanges and role of or the significance of skills in India. Employment exchange, you understand, or I'm sure you maybe have a witness of this, that employment exchanges were there for enrolling youth and putting them at suitable employment or suitable jobs. That was required for India. He also talked about land reforms because he believed that the compartments that we have created in terms of caste in India have really made Indian economy weaker, and almost there are people who work at a place where they don't like the work. For instance, those who had the land were not the tillers, and those who were cultivating were not the landowners. And if you are not a landowner, you cannot really work as best as you would if it was your land. So he wanted to remove all these contradictions, and that is why he talked about land reforms. He talked about, although he didn't really support the Fourth Amendment, but he wanted that suitable legislation for agriculture also is done. He wanted to make agriculture an industry in the long run. I think our present Prime Minister, Honorable Modi ji, is trying to walk in that direction. He's almost taken lots of ideas like Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, Sabka Prayas, which means everyone must work together. And Babasaheb Ambedkar really wanted economy to be stronger with the efforts from all the classes, all the communities, all the people of India. And if we still follow his ideas of making India a stronger, self-reliant nation that moves through social reforms and also economic reforms, which we already are treading towards.
So, very well explained by you, Professor Yadav. And since we are entering into the concluding stage of program, in very short, I want to take your comments on how Dr. Ambedkar's work and life journey can be taken as an inspiration to address the social and economical challenges that we are facing right now.
I think we must emphasize on education, because education is the key to empowerment, which Dr. Ambedkar advocated and which he himself was in fact a symbol of. So education, and then making the economy stronger, and then making the society united, and having a democratic spirit, having a moral conscience, and ultimately having love for our nation is what we can learn or get inspired about from the life of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, is my take on it.
And what's your take on this, Professor Singh?
One thing I would like to request through you to the whole nation. His thesis of problem of Indian rupees is completing its 100th year. We are in 2023. He wrote this in 1923. It's necessary for every academia that we must go into details what he has written in that book. Second, he was all for urbanization. And when you read that thesis, you will find that he is discussing about suburban centers besides the big centers. And Honorable Prime Minister, when discussed about 100 urban cities, then I was reminded of those lines of Babasaheb Ambedkar. You need to have good urban cities and urbanization, but not centralized in one or two major cities of the country. Second thing, his focus. I'm discussing those areas which are not covered normally. One, equality, liberty and fraternity. Very clearly describes in his thought that I have not taken these ideas from French Revolution. I have taken these ideas from Gautam Buddha. Through these lines, I would again request our friends in academia and other words that please read our institutions in ancient India, how they were contributing to the social justice and the practices in society. And third, joint family system. If you read Babasaheb's PhD thesis, you will find that he is very much concerned about the division of lands. And he requests that the system, at that time it was British system, but he requests through that we must work on unity of the families so that we could be at the larger pool lands for our agriculture. And you will realize the smaller piece of land never contributes much to the agricultural economy. The Dr. Ambedkar was very much for it, that both of the Kisan should be united so that we can produce more. And lastly, I'll go with Professor Sushma Yadav. Education, unity of the country, and economy are the three areas where we should work collectively so that the dreams of Babasaheb Ambedkar is realized.
And with these insightful input, thank you so much, Professor Sushma Yadav and Professor S.P. Singh for joining us on All India Radio.
Namaskar.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on Babasaheb Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's contribution to nation building. The participants were Professor Sushma Yadav, Member UGC and Pro VC Central University of Haryana, and Sri Prakash Singh, Director South Campus, University of Delhi, and Omvesh Upadhyay, AIR Correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 92890 94044.